formal tour. So I'll just share a couple of key details, and then feel free to circulate. I'll circulate. I'm happy to answer questions or share funny anecdotes about the prints as I know them. What I will point out, based on the conversation we were just having in the library, is that the exhibition is really organized with the commissioned prints on this wall, and the prints circulated in the exhibition, a small selection of that much larger body of 212 prints on this wall. So you have the commissioned prints through the 30s, through 39, and then the prints circulated in the exhibition that were annually staged by the Woodcut Society. And everything in this gallery came either in 1935 or 1939 as part of this gift given by Alfred Fowler to the Americans. If there are questions now, I'm happy to answer questions. Otherwise, feel free to look.
Well, what are some of the interesting anecdotes you said?
So many interesting
you were going to share.
Perfect, because we can just turn around and look at the case. One wonderful thing I think is in this show that we were able to do with this show is show one full folio, as opposed to just having the prints detached from their context. Every commissioned print was circulated in a folio of this type, as I was saying before, with an essay about the piece. Some of those essays were written by the artist, as is the case in this instance. Alan Lewis wrote this essay. Others were written by curators or scholars. What's wonderful about this particular folio is that Alan Lewis designed the entirety of it. He set all of the type, he designed all of the graphics, and he created his three-color print. And so you have that as a single artistic product, as opposed to something that was sort of matted in this bigger folio. And so I was really happy to be able to show this impact in this manner. Also very cool about this is that on the back of it, he indicates that it was printed on a Washington hand press. So he's very specific in terms of how this was printed, knowing that it's going to print aficionados. Alan Lewis, okay, another cool detail. This is hard because we're a big group, but Alan Lewis also happened to design the typeface used in the New Yorker, which is why, for a book that he was involved in the design for in the early teens, which is why that's the typeface we use as the header for the show. Is that okay? Keep going.
And I'll just stop for a minute. I'm going to be the bad cop, and if you just be aware of how close you are to the art. You see, we're using hanging rails here.
Yeah,
so
this
everything
is my concern with us.
So I think,
together as a group.
maybe just a few comments, and then if we can spread out, and Kate does a great job of circulating and engaging in conversation, just so we don't get back to our death and incident reports.
You could say something about the lineman, how electricity was coming in.
Absolutely, yeah. No, that's good.
That maybe that's what we'll do. Fundraiser.
Depending on how badly it's broken, you can buy a supplement to this collection.
Yeah.
Because, of course, the Woodcut Society keeps commissioning prints after 39. We just don't have them. The word right back, they're beautiful. Okay, so I'll point out a couple of things and then move forward. Yeah, well, he's an amateur. I think it's really bad.
Okay,
Okay, so just as we're moving down the space, I'll point out the Maya Smith, which I talked about a bit because one of her prints is featured in Max Claire Leighton's book, juxtaposed with a Berger Sensen. And this is a really wonderful example of a very specific wood engraving technique, the use of the multiple tool, which is what Claire Leighton's drawing attention to. It's pervasive through Maya Smith's work, and it is really the only way to create this kind of checkered grid in the background of this print. So I think that's a wonderful example of really proficient use of what is a difficult and dangerous tool to use in creating wood engravings. There's a wonderful quote in one of the Woodcut Society bulletins from Walter Joseph Phillips about this delay. And it's been really helpful for me in understanding this print as part of his transition from creating color woodcuts to working in black and white wood engravings. Because when I first came to this print, I thought it might be over-inked. And so it was interesting, I'll just read this to you. It was interesting to see Walter Joseph Phillips write, the proportions of black and white in a woodcut cannot be gauged by rule. Size and purpose, besides technical and aesthetic considerations, all have a bearing on the matter. Gordon Craig likes his effect to be one of a strong gray. Blackline illustrators prefer a light gray effect, approximating that of a page of type. My print, this delay, is blacker than either. black for book illustration, but I hope not too black to stand alone. So I think it's interesting in this sort of wider world of woodcut, as well as sort of hearing Walter Joseph Phillips work out what he's doing in black and white. And I don't know, is it too black to stand alone? I certainly thought so initially, but I'm partial to the print. But he's also definitely, I mean, you see the rippling of that paper is only in the image. It's almost oversaturated and was beautiful to Paul.
And it's completely different from here when I was standing up close. It did look just like a black, solid black, but back here I can see the mountainside, the tree growth.
Delicate detail in there.
Yeah.
Almost like dusk, you're still being able to see the...
I was really happy to come across that quote again, because I think it recontextualizes his work for me and shows me that he's thinking through his process. I'll point out that Claire Layton, just because we were talking about getting upstairs, if you're looking for an extraordinarily proficient wood engraver, she's your gal. These are beautiful, they're full of detail. She uses every tool available to her to create her prints, and she's just so well known for that in the moment. Which is also something that I found really interesting in working on this show. You get really, really famous printmakers like Sarah Clayton, juxtaposed with people who are little known or not known at all. Trying to think of a good example of that. Well, yeah, nobody really knows about Grover Peacock, Rustler, and Ross anymore. Though she was quite well known in the moment. So you have this really wide mix of professionals and amateurs, well known and little known, both then and today.
And male and female.
And male and female. We're 50% female in this space, which I can almost never do in any gallery of American art. And that happens naturally because relief printmaking is so much more accessible in the moment. Again, we were talking about its affordability in the library. So women really have an entree into this medium. And you can create a relief print in your home. You don't need a press to create these prints. It's much more accessible, and I think that's part of why you see so many women in this space. The white line woodcuts are beautiful. It's a privilege to be able to feature Blanche Lizelle juxtaposed with the work of two of her students who she trained in her Provincetown studio. Again, Blanche Lizelle, a really, really well-known printmaker, an astonishingly proficient printmaker, who I feel lucky to have in this show. But very cool to have her work juxtaposed with that of her students, and you see some of the shifts in technique even between what she's doing with that white line woodcut technique, the Provincetown technique, and what her students end up doing with it. The Warren Bryan Mack prints are a good example of an amateur in this space, but you would never know it because they're so exceptionally detailed and beautiful. He's actually a professor of agriculture in Pennsylvania who makes these essentially in his free time. But it becomes so talented in this medium that he's not only circulating his work in these exhibitions, he's also, he becomes a member of the National Academy of Design. So he does develop a reputation for these woodcuts. They're just not his primary pursuit. And they're astonishing. I wanted to include one of his works in the show, and when I had these prints together in the viewing room, everyone who came in zoomed into these and said, wow, those are just so detailed. So I thought, we had to have two.
I'm not much of a label reader, but I realized that this is one path. These aren't separate blocks. That kind of blew my mind.
Yes.
So each one of these areas were inked, and then one path through the press, or through the whatever.
Yeah, or probably rubbed by hand.
Yeah, hand rubbed.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, doesn't that flatten you out?
Yeah.
With these very fine white lines separating those areas of color, and it should shock you. We did some programming with the Kansas City Art Institute printmaking department in conjunction with this show as well. None of them, the instructors, the students, nobody believed that this could have possibly been done in a single pass. But what's really wonderful, I think I finally won this argument after many, many conversations. You see the grain of the block is uniform through all of those passages of color. It really is a single pass. There aren't multiple blocks here. And it's a technique that I don't think a lot of people use anymore, but that is obviously very popular in the 20s and 30s and is really pioneered by these Provincetown Massachusetts printmakers.
Is it more difficult than single block?
Well, it is, so it's a single block, and usually for then multiple.
Yeah.
You know, I think they're difficult in different ways, and I think Blanche Lozelle actually gets to this technique because it seems more expedient from her perspective. You only have to carve one block.
Yeah.
It creates a very different effect. But at the same time, it takes a great deal of sort of care and precision to ink this block for a single pass, as opposed to aligning multiple blocks and doing multiple passes with.
It's my understanding that the white line print style was developed to try and replicate Japanese woodblock printmaking by only using one block. Also, I think I read that it wasn't ink, but actually watercolor paints that they used. So they weren't actually rolling it, they were actually painting it on.
And the folks at KCAI were at least convinced that they were probably also masking areas as they were painting on, so maybe working from the center out and had stencils to mask certain areas to avoid.
Oh, you have to.
Yeah. So it does become finicky, I think.
Yeah.
There's also, she did only editions of like 5 for each print, and you can actually see, I think Boston Museum of Fine Art has another copy of this print, and the colors are completely different.
Yeah, I love that. You get a completely different print with each pass. And one of her students, yeah, it's kind of really cool. Mabel Amelia Hewitt also has a number of her blocks slated at the Cleveland Museum of Art, and so you can actually see some of that color blending on the block, as well as multiples of her prints. What else? Getting earlier this week. Oh, here's aren't they wonderful? I know. That's true. And international. I've lost them all. We were talking about things that Fowler doesn't shy away from, and among them are social issues, particularly in the exhibitions that circulate. There are a number of prints that really deal with contemporary political and social issues. And one example is Jessie Jo Eckford's The Lineman, which I think is just a beautiful print unto itself, but is also something that I think for a contemporary viewer in that moment, in that exhibition, would evoke questions about rural electrification. Likewise with Homebrew, with Barrett's Homebrew, again, you're sort of right at the end of Prohibition, so this is addressing a very contentious political issue in that moment. Thomas Mason's Kiara's Girl wood engraving is another really interesting technique that you don't see very often. He's actually printing this black and white wood engraving with 3 blocks to create the kind of subtle shading and gradation in this print. Beautiful and unusual. I love the Helen Webb Keller. I just think she has used patterns in exceptional ways. And I guess I would point out Eric Slater's The Stack Yard, in part because... I would point this out because it suggests, too, that there was sometimes a disconnect between the artist and the folio, in that the folio essay for this print indicates that Eric Slater hand-rubbed each of these 200 prints. And so I thought that was odd, but went ahead and put it in my label. There's no way that's in fact the case, because now that I've been looking at this under gallery lighting, you see the impression lines that suggest to me that this had to have been printed on a press. And so it's interesting to think that maybe Slater typically hand-rubbed his print, and that's what he said to the person writing the essay that accompanied this. But for this edition of 200, it was printed on a press. So, okay, and then we can circulate. Thank you all.
Thank you.
No need for oh, of course. Dr. King. I'll never get used to that. Because they're so often the model for the circulation.
I wonder if they
things coming up. Every month we have print society.